please keep that in mind. The file will live on the internet forever. Let's see, if you happen to be sharing a connection, meaning you have someone with your group that did not register for the webinar, please email me at the nctta@drugfreenc.org email address and let me know. For folks who are attending via a group who did not register, this is the only way that we have a way to track your attendance in order to mail out the certificate later. And speaking of certificates, they will be received within 2 weeks. The TTA Center is going on the road again next week, so it may be week after next before the certificates are provided, but we will certainly send those out to you as soon as possible. And if you need help, please just let us know. And my phone number is 336-306-4636. And feel free to text me if you have issues in the meantime. And the email, again, is nctta@drugfreenc.org. So, Lindsay, I think I will, I've completed my housekeeping, and it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. So, again, good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Stockman, and I am here today to talk to you all about coalitions and providers. So, just a little bit about me really quick. So, I am a Director of Prevention Services for Western Youth Network, located in Boone, North Carolina. And yes, before you ask, we did have snow this week. So, I've been in the substance abuse prevention field for 9 years right now. I am a certified CSAPC. So, for those who don't know, it's a certified substance abuse prevention consultant. I have been a director of a coalition for most of the time I've been in the field. Recently, I did switch agencies that I work for, so now I'm currently working as the director of a Year 6 Drug-Free Community Coalition. I am also a CADCA trainer, so those who aren't familiar with CADCA, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, and I was the 2018 Advocate of the Year for CADCA. So I am very passionate about coalitions, but I also try to play devil's advocate because I also work for a provider. So I also have a lot of feelings for providers as well. So I'm excited to share with you some interesting thoughts today. So again, like Jamie said, if you have any questions, please send them to me or Jamie in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer them as we can. So let's get started on our goals today. And this is not rhetorical. I want to hear from you all what you're expecting to hear from me today. What are either issues or troubles you're having, or what do you need to hear to hopefully move forward in a positive light, whether you're a coalition or a provider. So if you could just send those to me in the chat box, I'm going to give you a minute to do so. Okay, still waiting to see if we get any questions. Like I said, not rhetorical.
I don't have any questions yet.
Nope. So, okay, we're going to keep moving forward, but if you do end up having questions or any goals that you would like to hear today, please put them in the chat box. So here's an overview of our agenda today. So we're going to talk a little bit about providers, and when I say the word providers, I mean providers that receive block grant fundings. I am not talking about your LME or MCO, okay? We are also going to do an overview of coalitions, those that are a 501c3 nonprofit and those who are housed under providers. We're going to talk about some different myths. We're going to talk about the crosswalk of language. As we all know, there are so many different types of languages. There are CSAP strategies, there's CADCA strategies. We have our state, which has different language, so we're going to talk a little bit about those. We're also going to talk about what providers and what coalitions do, okay, and what the funding restraints of each can be and what their guidelines are. We're also going to talk about the expectations of each, how to work together and support one another, what coalitions can ask for, as well as what providers can ask for of coalitions, how to resolve any conflict, even though I know none of us ever deal with any conflict. We're going to have a few examples, and then we're going to open it up for questions, okay? we did get a question really quick about boosting attendance to a coalition that someone's been assigned to. It hasn't met regularly in 6 to 8 months, and it needs to be rejuvenated. Great. We will address that in just a little bit, and if I don't answer it fully, then we can chat after this. But thank you for your question. So the first thing about a provider, as I said, I'm talking about a provider that receives block grant funding, okay? So the definition of a block grant funding is a block grant is a large sum of money granted to the national government by a regional government with only general provisions as to the way it is to be spent, in contrast to the categorical grant, which has stricter and more specific provisions on the way it is to be spent. So all that to say that this is how the funding funnels, right? We all know this. We have the federal government funnels the money to SAMHSA, funnels it to the North Carolina Prevention Department, which then funnels it to our local LME MCOs, that then in turn sends it to the prevention providers. What most people don't know is that as a block grant provider, you have to apply for those funds. So when you receive block grant funding, you have to provide for those counties that you serve. So that can be done. Okay? What about coalitions? Well, a coalition is an alliance for combined action. Coalitions come in many different forms for many different reasons. As we all know, we could probably list 10 or 15 different coalitions that we know of in our communities today, whether it's focused on gun violence or homelessness or substance abuse. There's so many different coalitions, so many different reasons that coalitions come together. Some coalitions are standalone 501c3 nonprofits, while other coalitions may be housed by a provider. Really quickly, for those in the chat box, tell us, and I know the chat box can be a little difficult, tell me if you work for a provider or you work for a coalition. I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, I have a couple providers, one provider. Provider. As I'm looking through the attendee list, Insight, Coastal, RHA, Coalition. I see at least one coalition. Another provider. Okay. So let's talk about some different myths, and I'm going to ask for you all to keep participating as well. Thank you all for putting provider. We mostly have providers on the line today. But let's talk about some different myths, and I have our unicorn there, our mythical creature. So some different myths that I've heard throughout the years of being in the field are that providers have all the money, right? At least that's what the community thinks, and that's what the coalitions think. That they don't support coalitions. Yeah, they might come to a coalition meeting, they don't really do anything, they're just at the table because they have to be, okay? That they hoard the money and they don't give it to coalitions. Well, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit more. Sometimes the thought is that providers have a lump sum of money and that they might have these funds that they could actually give them to coalitions and help them accomplish their action plans. Unfortunately, what most people don't understand is that usually the money goes 100% towards salary. It pays for people, not for stuff. Another myth of providers is that they only have the interest of the agency at heart, that really they're not thinking about anybody else, they're only focused on their goals, okay, and that they just want to steal the coalition's data. Okay, I've heard this one quite a bit. What about other myths for providers? If you've heard of any other myths, as we have several providers on the line with us today, please put them in the chat box so we can chat about them. And we're going to move on to coalitions. So coalitions, some myths that we've all heard about coalitions is that they constantly need money. They're always looking for money, need money, have to have money to accomplish their goals. That they don't support providers. And this is where I think it comes in that they think that providers don't support them as well. They believe they should receive block grant funds like providers do. we have a lot of coalitions across the state who are attending the same meetings, doing the same things as providers. So some of those coalitions think that they should receive block grant funding. Another myth is that coalitions only focus on their issues of substance abuse. Again, not true. Funding, as we all know, is all tied to our grants. So if we have a coalition, for example, that is a drug-free coalition and they're focusing on underage drinking, then yes, that money under a drug-free community has to be 100% spent on underage drinking, okay? We do have a question that came in. Provider turnover can be high, so how can a provider that doesn't stick around really know about the community being served? It's a great question. I'm going to table that one for now and make a little note, and Jamie, if you'll help me remember this one. But we'll talk about that at the end. But that's a great question. What other myths is that? Okay, so the person who wrote that, are you saying that that's a myth? I think that you're saying that's a myth. Yes, okay. So it can be. So providers that have, so the myth is that a provider that doesn't stick around really doesn't know the community being served. It is a myth, and it can be a myth. We have a lot of providers that have had the same staff for years and continue to serve their community as well. We can talk more about how to address that myth when we get a little further in. Any other myths about coalitions or about providers? Oh, we got another one. Less professional knowledge about the field for coalitions. Absolutely. This is a myth that I've heard several times. I've also heard it in various different areas, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute, but it is another myth as well that coalitions, there's less knowledge about the field. Okay? So now let's talk about CSEP strategies versus CADCA strategies. This is where I tend to find the most issues when I'm talking with coalitions as well as providers. So you'll see on one hand we have our CSEP strategies. We all know them. The 6 strategies we're responsible for: information dissemination, education, alternatives, environmental, community-based, and problem ID and referral. Okay? Now, how does that translate into what coalitions are expected to do? Well, coalitions have these 7 different levels, different keys and steps that they have to do to achieve environmental change. And they start with providing information, building skills, provide support, enhancing access and reducing barriers, changing consequences or incentives and disincentives, physical design, and modified change policy. The ones with the asterisks beside them are the ones that are actually environmental strategies. So when we have these CSEP strategies that we're, as providers, trying to inform coalitions about, it can get very confusing because the language is not the same. Obviously, providing information dissemination, you know, we have a few education things that can be linked here and there, but it can be hard to try to translate a CSEP strategy into CADCA and CADCA into CSEP. So I'm showing these to you to be mindful of the different strategies that each have to do and each have to be responsible for. Again, as a provider, we know that our CSEP strategies we're responsible to the state with our funding for, ultimately to SAMHSA. And with CADCA, these are strategies that under specific grants like drug-free communities that they're responsible for and that they have to turn around and get approval from SAMHSA to do. So everything goes back to SAMHSA, but I feel comfortable saying they don't always talk to each other. So we have another question, a question from the field. What is the history of the language not being the same? I think the history I'm not 100% sure on, but for me it seems like there are just so many different levels. It seems that the CSEP strategies can go hand in hand with the CADCA strategies, but they don't mirror each other, which I wish they did, since everything ultimately goes back to SAMHSA. So I think more of the question around the language, I would ask that, to me, that would be a state question, because when I get the most confusing questions, it's about the state reporting in the state wants specific things that don't link up to our CACA strategies as a coalition, and sometimes it's hard to link back to other strategies as well. Any other questions about the different strategies and how they link together or how to use them? Okay. But the plus side on all these different things is that we all come back to SPIF, the Strategic Prevention Framework. And I know we've all seen these slides around assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation. One thing I think that as providers and as coalitions that we could be more in tune with is in the middle, with our sustainability and our cultural competence. It seems that this is something that people think, oh, we don't need to do as often, but ultimately it's in the middle because it should be done throughout all 5 steps and continuously. So the plus side of all this is we all always come back to SPIF. So what do providers do? Well, providers, they are responsible for specific catchment area or number of counties, responsible for all 60 SEP strategies plus SINAR. And for those who aren't familiar with SINAR, we're talking about the tobacco information that is required from every provider. There's a lot of reporting, ECHO, as we all know, which is our new reporting system. There's meetings that have to be attended throughout each of the counties in the catchment area that a provider is responsible for, as well as fundraising. Some providers have to do their fundraising. They have to find people to support them and be with them. There's a lot of networking involved. There's a lot of management that goes on. I know we have a lot of providers on the call right now, so is there anything I'm not catching in this? Tell me other things that providers are required to do in their daily job. I'll give you a second to type. I totally agree. So building relationships come first for many. This is a key aspect, and not just providers, but in coalition as well, building relationships. Relationships can create the foundation and further work, absolutely. I think they have to. Relationships is a huge part of being a provider as well as a coalition, and another way that we are similar. Absolutely. Linking key stakeholders. Absolutely. Bringing in those people that aren't at the table that need to be at the table, making sure that they are coming to the table, finding the win-win for both the stakeholder and the provider. Training. There's a lot of training that is required of providers, as well as training that we give, correct? So there's webinars and there's state trainings and all kinds of other funding trainings that we have to attend on a regular basis. Anything else that providers are required to do? Okay. So what about coalitions? I love this little slide because it totally reminds me of what I've heard before. Coalitions are all about kumbaya. They just want to make everybody happy, right? Peace, love, and community. So what do coalitions do? Well, depending on the funding of the coalition, they work with the community to help reduce substance abuse. So for the webinar today, we're talking about just substance abuse coalitions. There's a lot of reporting that goes with coalitions, okay? Usually the least amount of money requires the most reporting. I speak from experience. There's also fundraising. There's also meetings. There's also trainings and webinars. But what else? What else are coalitions required to do? They're required for linking key stakeholders as well. Every substance abuse coalition or drug-free community coalition has to have those 12 key sectors involved in the coalition to be successful. They have to be a key source of knowledge for the community. Thank you. That's absolutely true. They're called on a lot. For any news story that breaks around substance abuse, people want a quote. There's a health fair they call the coalition. Be a reflection of the community being served or cultural competence? Absolutely. They should be a reflection of the community. They're the go-to for some citizens, absolutely. People go straight to them if there's an issue or if there's something that they want done. They will go to the coalition. What else? Oh, I like this one. They can be a source of political power, absolutely. Coalitions have a lot more weight when it comes to working with our elected officials. Personally, that's what I think, especially if they've been around for a long time and they've made those relationships. Relationship building is also big for coalitions. Anything else? Basically, what I wanted you to get from this is that everything that a provider is responsible for, except with their reporting, is the same thing that coalitions are responsible for. You might see that you both have more in common than you think. The meetings and fundraising and the reporting, capacity building is a great one. I got limited reporting, lack of formal reporting so often. I would say that that depends on the funding for the coalition. So a drug-free community grantee, for example, will have 2 formal reports due a year, and it takes quite a few hours to complete those. Depending on other funding sources, they'll have other reporting, just like providers. But it depends on the coalition as well. If they don't have any formal funding or federal or state funding, they might not have formal reporting. Okay? Capacity building, another great one. Yeah, building that coalition's knowledge, local knowledge. They really need to know their community. I used to tell people that you really had to have your 30-second elevator speech memorized because you never knew when you were going to run into somebody, and you had to have your data points on hand and your little speech. Making connections with youth, absolutely. Faith-based community and recovery, yes, something we're seeing trending across the nation is definitely working more with recovery, which is amazing and far past due. Anything else? Youth is also a big one. Youth, as we know, are the future, and training them and getting them prepared to take on the world and be an advocate for us is a big feather in our cap. Oh, information dissemination. So this one, I think coalitions are expected to do. I definitely get a lot of calls for, hey, I need handouts or brochures, I have a health fair, or I need stuff to give out at a parent night. But I would say we're trying to move away from that, probably as coalitions as well as providers, because it's so expensive and hard to measure if it's effective or not. But it is true. We do get called on a lot for coalitions for pencils and handouts and what can you give us so we can give out. Yes, the coalitions that are not grant funded frequently need assistance with building their functional capacity. Okay. Yeah, if they're not grant funded, then I can see that they would need more assistance to build capacity, probably more training in the field, more training on what's expected of them, because they're not getting that from their grantee, from their grant provider. And training, yes, absolutely. Coalitions can provide quite a few trainings. They're also required to attend a bunch of trainings as well as providers. I'm going to give it another minute since we've been getting so many responses in the chat box before we move on. Okay. Thank you all for your participation. So let's talk about funding restraints. Again, I love this little picture of fighting over the money because this is typically what happens, right? We see providers or block grant providers can only use funds for limited things like staff, supplies, mileage, trainings. And coalitions, I'm going to speak specifically for a drug-free community, can only use funds for staff, small amounts of supplies, mileage, no big purchases, okay? So what other things do we see? As we have so many providers on the line today, what other things do we see, or what are you asked for the most? What do people in the community come to you and say, I need this? can you help? I have some examples of my own, but I'll leave the chat box for just a second and see if we hear anything. So one of the things I know as a provider that I hear from the community a bunch is, can you pay for surveys? And usually people would go to the coalition and say, hey, can you pay for this survey? Well, if you've never looked into how much a survey can cost, like a prize survey, you can be talking $10,000 to $20,000, which is a lot of money to come out of a grant. So that's one example. Who has any others? While you're thinking on that, we got another comment about the previous slide about providers, about coalitions can serve as a point of connection to the leaders of the community beyond political. Absolutely. There are so many people that are not elected officials that are not in that position of quote-unquote power, but there are so many powerful people that are not elected officials. So that is a wonderful point. Thank you. Somebody said, I've been asked to provide meeting space for a coalition, something that is central to multiple locations. Absolutely. And then somebody said we can use money for attending training. Some might be required. Yep, that's true. For both coalition and providers. I know, for example, if we get an email from the state saying that something is required as a provider, well, then we might have to attend that, right? Same thing for a coalition. They might receive an email or something saying that they have to attend a meeting at a state that is required for them for their grant. So absolutely. Okay. So let's talk about expectations. So as a provider, these are some of the expectations. A provider wants to work with coalitions and assist to make changes, right?
Okay. Okay, cool.
Okay, we can hear some background noise. If you can please mute your phone. Thank you. Some other expectations could be they want to help with substance abuse and misuse in their community. I know that most providers, that is all of our goal, right? We want to help the community. We want to work on substance abuse, misuse, and help our communities fight that. Another example is providers want to provide data to the state that they're being effective. I think that's 100% true. We want to make sure that we're representing our community well. We want to make sure that we're providing information to the state so they can report back to SAMHSA so we can keep, as a provider, we can keep our block grant funds, okay? As a coalition, some expectations are that we want to have providers at the table to assist. Absolutely. From experience, I can say I want to have somebody who's going to be more than just a butt in a seat. I want somebody who's going to participate and be there to help and give insight and feedback and really help us accomplish our action plan, okay? Something else is that we want the provider to provide some funds to help offset costs. Now, when I say this, I don't mean the $10,000 or $20,000 we're talking about for a survey. I'm talking, you know, we're having a small event. Can you purchase pamphlets? Can you print some flyers? Could you print the agenda for the coalition meeting? Could you provide meeting space, which somebody said that they've been asked to do that before? Things like that that can really help a coalition who already has funds that are pretty tight, okay? Another example is a coalition wants to be involved in decision-making in their communities. For this is probably one of the biggest pet peeves I have, is that sometimes we have providers who have to create an action plan on how they're going to work in their communities, but they forget to invite the coalitions to the table to hear what they have to say. And sometimes this can go over pretty badly, right? Because what we want to do is we want to be reflective of the community. So one of the first steps should be to talk to that coalition to see what's on their action plan and see how you can work together, and that can be on the providers as well. So if anything, it would just be made sure that it would be crossed off both lists. Any feedback on that one? Okay. So how can we work together? Okay, this is the question I get asked a lot. Know that you more than likely have the same agenda, okay? I have yet to meet anybody who works for a provider who's like, no, I'm just not going to go. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to help people who are struggling with substance abuse, misuse. I don't want to help youth. I've yet to meet anybody to say that works in our field, okay? Have open and honest communication. I think this is imperative. I try to be 100% transparent, not only with the coalition that I'm a paid staff member for, but also with my agency as a provider. And that goes the same for the LME MCO that I report to, okay? Work together and have regular meetings with just the two of you. It doesn't have to be some big, huge meeting with a really specific agenda. It really could just be, let's get together every couple of months, or it could be every month if you need to. Let's sit down, let's have a discussion and talk about where we're at on our action items and who can help with what, okay? Be clear about your needs. Don't be this person who's like, well, it'd be great if you could just come to this meeting. Be specific. Tell them what you need, not only as a coalition, but also as a provider. Okay, so I got something in the chat box. Many folks don't know the role differences as a coalition member. I'm wondering if you can type more about that. Do you mean the difference between a coalition member and a provider because you work for both? And then the second part is also sometimes realistic goals are difficult to identify. I absolutely agree. It can be hard to identify goals, but I think that's something that we could work on. I'm happy to chat offline with anybody after this if you would like to talk about specific things that are happening in your community. So I will put up my contact information at the end, and we can talk more about that. I'd like to help. And then young coalitions need TA. Absolutely. There's plenty of technical assistance available to coalitions out there. They just have to know where to ask. And I think that's also something we can identify. CADCA is free. They have free online trainings on CADCA, and I'm happy to try to point that out to you on where to go. You do not have to be a CADCA member and pay the fee. There's free online trainings. There's also people in our great state who've been doing coalition work for, I've been doing it 9 years. We have people that have been doing 30 and 40 years with coalition work who I'm sure would be more than happy to provide some technical assistance. Let's see, coalitions need, whoa, I'm getting so many. Coalitions need clear and defined roles since many individuals have unique talents to take advantage of. Absolutely. I think they should receive that training. If they're not receiving that training, then that's some kind of TA that we could help set up. Absolutely. So again, because I don't know who's sending that one, I will put up my information after this, and I would love it if you would call me and we could set up a time to chat. I'm interested in getting free online trainings. Okay. What happens if you're a new coalition and we don't know where to go for help? If you don't know, then you just need to start asking, okay? I can think of people all the way in Wilmington who are great coalitions, who are drug-free communities, who I'm sure would love to have a conversation with anybody who would just, need some information. I know coalitions in Charlotte. I know coalitions in Asheville. I'm in Boone. We have coalitions all the way past Asheville and Cherokee County. There are just so many wonderful coalitions, as well as people that have been in this field in our state for a really long time who would love to have a conversation and help you, because I can tell you, as somebody who goes to Capitol Hill every year to advocate for the needs we have as coalitions and providers, it is something that we're more than happy to help with. And, of course, we have our NCTTA system. Jamie, who introduced me earlier, who's here with us now. We're so appreciative to him since our beautiful young Terry Moy is out with her beautiful baby. But they're also here to help. So you can reach out to the NCTTA system, and I'm sure that Jamie can put up his email again so everybody has that and his number. And they are the ones that reach out to do these webinars just like this. So there's definitely resources out there, and we can definitely talk more about those at the end, and I can show you some resources, okay? Okay, I think I caught up on all the chat box. I'm going to keep going through this slide, but please keep putting things in the chat box. I'm loving it. Thank you all so much for participating. Another thing is don't put one another on the spot. For this, I mean in front of a coalition meeting. So obviously, if you're in a coalition meeting or you're at a provider meeting, if you're at any kind of meeting and there's something you need, be nice about it, be clear about it, but you don't have to put them on the spot out of nowhere where they're like a deer in headlights. Okay, be respectful of your timing and if that's right or not. Okay. help educate one another in a respectful way. You know, I have been working with a provider who does not have a substance abuse prevention background and really does need some information and some more assistance on where to find things and are they doing things right. And it just takes a little bit of hand-holding, and that's not a bad thing. I'm pretty upfront in that I'm very busy, but I'm more than willing to help. So I think you can help educate one another in a very respectful way. Same thing for coalitions. You know, we're going to share some resources today. When I give you those, I would look at them yourself first, find the ones that you think are helpful, especially on the CADCO website. It can be overwhelming. Maybe have a one-on-one meeting and say, hey, I found these great resources. Maybe we could go through them together and see what you think. Maybe the coalition would like to go through them. You know, just be respectful about it because you don't want to assume that they don't know, but you still want to be able to help. Send information and materials without being asked, you know. If you get something that you think is awesome from another training, or if you get some information about a training or anything that's happening, you know, send it to them. They might be super interested and want to go. I can think right now of Ms. Wanda Boone in Durham is having her awesome training next week in Durham. I think I've sent it to probably 50 people because I've been so many times, and there's some space conversations going on, which is a sector that a lot of coalitions struggle with, and I think I've sent that to multiple people, like, hey, go to this. She really knows what she's talking about. So when you get information like that, the materials, just send them out there, okay? I just got something in the chat box. People appreciate receiving items that they're interested in without being asked. If we limit and don't overload, absolutely. Okay, great point. Thank you for bringing that up. There are times when you can overload them. So, for example, what I would do is, let's say the Parent Resource Center. So we have wonderful Anna Godwin who compiles everything for us and sends this great email, right? A lot of times I get that email 5 times. Not from Anna. Anna sends it to me, but then I have other people that are like, hey, I got this. You might want to see it. You might want to ask them before you start forwarding them stuff, hey, are you on an email list from this whatever? Do you get this email? I know I've done that for some people before I start forwarding, just because I don't want to overload them. So that's a wonderful point. Thank you. And then another one is invite one another to everything. You know, put them on the coalition email list. They don't have to come to all of them, but it'd be nice to be invited, right? Or it'd be nice for them to put it on their calendar so if they do have something else, maybe they can attend the next time. Same thing for your LME MCO. I put them on the coalition email list, and, you know, they show up every now and then because something canceled, they can make it. So invite them to things, and not just meetings. Invite them to the fun things. For those of you who don't know, April is Volunteer Appreciation Month. You know, invite them if you're having something to appreciate your volunteers this month. I know at our agency we're doing a little appreciation and inviting a bunch of volunteers. At our upcoming coalition meeting, we're going to provide a breakfast, you know, a light breakfast, coffee, fruit, some donuts, and just let people know that you appreciate them. And it doesn't always have to be all work, no play. Okay? Anything else in this one? I don't think so. Okay. So what can providers ask for from a coalition? They can ask for collaboration, right? There's a lot being asked of all of us. So it's important that we do collaborate together and that we work together, not only on action plans and what we're doing in the community, but that we know what each other is doing. I think it's one of the worst things to be in a meeting and somebody's like, well, I heard that you're doing this. And I'm like, that's not me. You know, I should have known about it before I got there. Okay, so collaborate. Data, you know, coalitions, if they are funded and they do collect data, then they have this great data. And sometimes they'll be willing to share that data with the provider, be willing to share that so we can report that to the state that, hey, look, what we're working on, we're making great progress. So, you know, data is a wonderful thing that providers could ask for. But before you ask for something like that, it's going to take a lot of relationship building. So if you do not have that relationship, I would not come in there and just say, hey, I heard you have data, let me get that. No, it's not going to happen. Okay, they have to trust you. Networking with others, okay, providers can ask for networking with others. Absolutely, they can come to the coalition meetings, they can come to any other events if they're invited, and get to know that community. You know, providers cover multi-county regions, so it'd be great for them to network and see what's happening. Other meetings to attend, especially if you have a provider that's new. what other meetings could that person be attending other than the coalition? Maybe the JCPC is very active. Maybe the Children Collaborative is happening, things like that. Many providers ask for what they want and need during the first meeting and closes people off to the community. Absolutely. And I think that's something that providers could probably work on. I think typically what happens as a provider is that we go into panic mode, right? We have all this reporting that's due. We have a lot of things happening at the state level. We want to make sure we're getting our things accomplished, but we don't think about building that relationship first, and that's really what we need to do. So what I would say to a provider is, yeah, it's important for you to get your needs across as long as you're partnering and collaborating with that coalition. I don't think I would do that in a coalition meeting. I would have that one-on-one meeting and say, I just want to be transparent with you. These are things I need. What do you need from me? And let's figure out that win-win for both of us, okay? A trusting relationship must be built first, and this takes time. Absolutely. From experience, it took me probably about 5 years to work with the school system to get them on board to work with me. And once I had data, I would not share that with anyone as a coalition, even being somebody that was housed under a provider. Okay, anytime anybody wanted to see it, look at it, do anything with it, I called the school. I had a contact and said, hey, so-and-so wants to, use this data for whatever. So I would get their permission first, and I actually put that in our MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, and our Coalition Involvement Agreement, or CIA. Okay? Another one's, let me read this. Not sure. Okay, so that's a great question. So we have a question that says, how might we deal with an individual coalition member who repeatedly works on projects not decided upon the coalition as a group? That's interesting. So like if the coalition is working on underage drinking, is that person going away and just working on marijuana and then coming back and reporting to the group? Tell me a little bit more about that, and if we can't address that, then we can talk after. Okay? And other things providers can ask for is what the money should be spent on if there are extra dollars. And this is really important, okay? If the provider has extra money, and I know that this is probably very rare, but ask the community or the coalition, if I had an extra, and it doesn't have to be a lot of money, I'm not talking thousands of dollars, but what if I had an extra $100 that I had to spend by the end of June? What could you use? And really what they might say is it could be something simple like paper, pens, some office supplies. It could be, well, there's a training coming up and I would really like to go and the registration's $50, right? So it might just be nice if before you just spend it on a bunch of sticky notes or something that you might not need is if you ask the coalition and we're able to help a little bit, okay? Okay, let's go to our next one. So what coalitions can ask for? Coalitions can ask for data, okay? A lot of our providers are collecting data as well. As we talked about in their reporting, they have to submit data and reports and action plans as well. So they could also ask for data, and this would be a great chance for you all to share data with each other. But again, be mindful of wherever you got your data that you're getting permission, okay? They can ask for money for some of their needs. Now, obviously, I'm not saying coalitions like, I need you to pay my rent, and my rent is, $2,000 a month. That's probably not going to happen. But they could say, we really could use some money for some supplies. Or there's a great conference coming up in Raleigh. It's $50 in one-night hotel. Could you help offset some of those costs? Okay. Some coalitions, they can also ask for someone to attend the meetings regularly. If you're a coalition and you do not have your provider attending regularly, they should be, okay? They should be there so they know what's going on in the community, what you're working on, and how you can collaborate. A great example for this is the drug take-backs that are coming up. We got the National DEA coming up at the end of the month. This is a great time for coalition members and providers to work together, volunteer on that Saturday for a couple hours. You'll also get to know your law enforcement better. It's just a great opportunity for everybody involved, okay? Excuse me. Also, coalitions can ask for an MOU or a CIA, okay? So a Memorandum of Understanding or a Coalition Involvement Agreement from the provider, and I always think that that's a great idea. I also encourage coalitions to ask for agency CIAs, and so this happens when you know, let's say me as a provider, I work at Western Youth Network, I sign a CIA. Well, let's say I leave Western Youth Network. Well, it's no longer they're looking for Lindsay Stockman. They can go to Western Youth Network as a coalition and say, well, we were working with Lindsay, but we also have a CIA from my boss, the executive director, saying that Western Youth Network would be there and be attending. So that means that somebody needs to be there. So we got a question, where can we see samples of MOUs and CIAs? Great question. I'm sure that the NCTTA Center has some. I also have samples. You can also look on the SAMHSA and the CADCA website for those as well. So whichever, if you want to look into those that I just told you, and then let me know, I'm happy to send you more. Okay. Anything else that people think that coalitions could ask for, or providers, or things that you've been asked for of as a provider or coalition? Okay. The other thing I'm going to say real quick about MOUs and CIAs is that they don't have to be very complicated. You know, depending on what you need it to say, so it can be really specific and it can be really complicated. It doesn't have to be, okay? I usually just try to put in there that somebody will attend the meetings and that you have to attend. You know, there's 12 months in a year. We don't meet 2 months out of the year due to holidays and vacation. So out of 10 months, you have to attend, you know, 9 of those or whatever it is to be a voting member. So, again, they don't have to be overcomplicated. Okay, conflict. So conflict is something I know we never deal with. Okay, I got another question, and I'll address that in just a second. So conflict is something I know none of us ever really have to deal with, but when we do, it can usually be between a provider and a coalition, or it could be provider on provider, or even coalition on coalition, right? Or within internally, it could be a provider internally, coalition internally. But what I suggest is having a one-on-one meeting, okay? If something starts to get a little heated, if you're in a meeting or something, I would wait till after to address that. You don't want to address it in front of everybody because it probably isn't going to make either one of you look good. Talk about the win-win for both of you, okay? So let's go back to a provider and a coalition. What is going to be, how can you help each other? What is going to get each of you to the table in a happy place working on similar goals? Okay, so talk about how that can happen. Get out of the office setting, okay? Offices can be very formal and boring and sometimes even intimidating. Go to Starbucks. Go to a local coffee shop. I'm not saying you have to buy their coffee, but, you know, just meet in a more casual, less intimidating setting, okay? And help each other understand, and do this without being condescending and without being a know-it-all in the same, but bring some materials with you and, you know, show them your contracts. So show them as a coalition your drug-free community action plan, and show them your contract with DFC and all the things that you have to do. And, you know, and as a provider, you know, show them the block grant report that you have to turn in. Show them ECHO and all the internal things that you have to put in there to generate your numbers. So that way they understand what you're going through. It's helpful to know the difference between a coalition, task force, and advisory board, as the expectations can be very different. That's true. Coalition and task force can be similar. A lot of people consider a task force like a step before a coalition. It can be informal. It can be a formal thing. It's usually like a planning committee. And then an advisory board, it just depends on the setup. Each coalition can have a totally different structure. I know a previous coalition I worked with, we had a small voting board where paid staff did not vote, but we were attending. When I say small, it was like 3 people. And then the coalition I work with now, we do not have a board. We're working on getting our board. So it just depends on what the requirements are due to the funding. Every coalition can be structured very different. Okay. I think it is important to know whether or not your coalition has been through the CADCA process, which would be getting them certified. So if they are a certified substance abuse prevention coalition and have been through CADCA, then there's a couple of different structures, even through CADCA, that they could take on. Okay, I'm going to give us another minute in the chat box to see any other conflicts that we've had that we might want some assistance with. Okay, I'm getting some really long ones. So this one, since we're moving from prevention education that was frequently classroom-based, yes, when I say patient with strategies like this and community work, it takes time to develop and cultivate as opposed to classroom prevention efforts, for example, where there's immediate success. Absolutely. I had this conversation the other day where it's great when we have something we can take a picture of, correct, where it's easy to see, right? You're in a classroom setting, you're teaching safe dates, or you're teaching some other curriculum. It's easy to see the change in the youth that you're impacting there. You can take a picture of it. When you're working in communities, it takes a lot longer. It's a totally different way of doing things, right? It's meetings, it's networking, it's before work events, it's, you know, maybe joining the Chamber of Commerce, it's going to that church event to build some more relationships, it's going to after-work events. It's totally a different beast. So absolutely, it can take a long time to build those relationships and to see success. So the way you measure your successes is different. Okay? Let's see, this one, most of the times coalitions are housed under the umbrella of the provider, and the coalition coordinator is typically a staff member of the provider organization. So kind of dominant coalition. Yes, so typically, and that is usually how I've been, is that the coalition has been housed under the umbrella of a provider, and I was a paid staff part of the time for the coalition and then a paid staff for the provider. This can be really tricky because you really have to balance that line of both. One of my not favorite things is to be running a coalition meeting and then have to give updates for my agency as well. I always tried to have somebody there from the agency, from the provider, to do that and to be that provider so I could just have my coalition hat on. A lot of coalitions, and CADCA would tell you this too, a lot of coalitions that start out under that umbrella, once they have finished funding or whenever they're comfortable, they usually break out and become their own nonprofit so they can have more control of what they do. So it is a tricky balance. It can be done. It can be done beautifully and successfully, as I've seen, but then other times coalitions want to have more freedom, so they do break out. Other trainings, whoa, we're getting so many chat box things. Let me see. Sorry, everybody. Let's see. Are there other trainings for coalitions beyond CADCA? I'm sure there are, but if you are a coalition focused on substance abuse prevention, then CADCA is like the big golden star pie in the sky. So that is what I would suggest. CADCA is not cheap to attend. Now, they had the mid-year forum in the summer, and they had the national forum in February, and I know that they're not cheap. There are stipends to help you to attend, but they have online free trainings, which I would suggest, and their National Coalition Academy, the NCA, is free as long as you can go pay for your travel and hotel and meals, things like that. Can I explain what, yeah, okay, I got two of these, a certified coalition is. So a certified coalition is when you have been through the National Coalition Academy. So once you go through a National Coalition Academy, which is one of the things CADCA provides, you have to provide different products. So if you are a drug-free community grantee, you've done most of those products. What you're required to do is a community assessment, a logic model, a strategic and action plan, an evaluation plan, a sustainability plan. And you'll go through this over, it's about a year process, and out of that year, there'll be 3 weeks that you would attend the National Coalition Academy. And what you would do is you would create those products during the academy and in between, and you would submit those to the CADCA staff, the trainers. They would approve them, and then if you're approved, you would get to graduate. And when you graduate, you get a really beautiful certificate. You're now a certified coalition academy, okay, or a coalition graduate. Okay, so that's what I mean when I say a certified coalition through CADCA. Okay, so again, CADCA is like the pie in the sky, golden star standard for substance abuse prevention coalitions. How much does the CADCA certification cost? Well, like I said, the training is actually free. You can go to the CADCA website, and they'll show you where trainings are, and you have to get there. So I know that this year there is one going on this week in Texas. There's one in West Virginia. There's one in Florida. There's one in New Mexico. You have to get there, pay for all your meals, your travel, but the training is actually free. I will tell you they fill up pretty quickly, and I don't think they've announced where next year is, but you could always call CADCA and talk to them about where they'll be at and get on that list. Okay? Let me make sure I addressed all the questions. What happens in the CADCA certification of a coalition? So I think I explained that one. You have the 5 products. You have to submit them. The tricky thing about CADCA is that it really needs to be one constant person for those 3 weeks, and then you really need to have a minimum of 2 people go. The second person can rotate, meaning it could be a different person each time, but they really need to be up to speed on what you've already done and what's going to be happening. Okay, it is a lot of work. Okay, you're not just going on this great vacation in Florida and you're going to have time to do stuff. I mean, you might, but it's a lot of work during this 3-week process. Okay. Any other questions on CADCA? I'll give you just a second. The other thing I want to mention while we're waiting for people to type is if you can't get through CADCA, because I know travel can be very expensive, then you should look at becoming a Certified Substance Abuse Prevention Consultant, or a CSAPC. Now, a lot of people tell me that they are a substance abuse specialist. This is different, okay? There's a specialist and then there's a consultant. It's similar things. You still register with the North Carolina board. You still pay for a certification. There's still a test. Still a bunch of trainings you have to do, but it's worth it. And I can tell you that we are declining in the number of people in the state that are certified. It is also a national certification, so if you moved out of state, that would travel with you. But you do have to recert every 2 years, but I can tell you it's 100% worth it. Okay? Okay, did anybody else have any scenarios that we needed to talk about in conflict? I'll give you just a second to type as I make sure I answered all these questions. Okay, so we do have a question. So to be a formal coalition, you do not have to go through CADCA, okay, depending on your funding. So drug-free communities, it's required to go through the CADCA Academy. I think it's required to go through in your first 1 or 2 years, and it's up to 10 years of funding, so as well as your 6 through 10. Do you know how many nationally have went through the CADCA process? I do not know, but there are maps that I could look at and let you know how many have been through it, but I would say probably thousands have been through the CADCA process. It's not mandated for a coalition, but again, it depends on your funding. So if you are a drug-free community grantee, then it is required. Okay? We are good resources we can direct local coalitions to. What are good resources we can direct local coalitions to who can't travel or have limited resources? This is a great question. So this is something I would say contact Jamie at NCTTA, or you can also contact the Prevention Provider Association, which is a state board that we have in the state where providers and coalitions work together to try to work on the same issues that we have, and we can definitely hook you up. I'm curious as to what region you're talking about. I think it came from Insight, so I'm thinking Charlotte area, but I know y'all cover a lot more than that, so let me know. But again, we could do webinars. I'm sure Jamie could, talk about webinars or technical assistance calls, but that is what NCTTA is set up for, to help with resources. And I'm happy to, talk about other resources that we can have put together. What else? I'll give y'all just another minute to type for anything on conflict or any other questions we had related. what is the biggest conflict that you've seen? In the community with coalitions? I'm guessing that question goes hand in hand. What is the biggest conflict you've seen in the community with coalitions? Biggest conflict I've seen is the community wanted to work on different issues than the coalition was willing to work on. And why this was a big conflict was because the coalition didn't have data to support focusing on what the community wanted to focus on. So I've worked with a coalition who obviously underage drinking was a problem and prescription pills, but the community really wanted to work on marijuana. There was not enough data to support working on marijuana because the statistics and the data that they had were showing that pills and prescription drugs were the increasing rapidly in that community. So that was a little bit of an offset, but I think it all comes to explaining that pretty clearly to the community and to the coalition. You know, this is where we have to go. This is how we have to do things. This is what the data says, and we will keep monitoring, you know, that marijuana is on the rise, but we didn't have enough to support it being one of the key substances. Okay? Does not respect process or hierarchy structure of some coalition sectors. Who doesn't? The community? The community doesn't respect process or hierarchy structure of some coalition sectors. What sectors? I'm going to wait for them to respond. Within the community and community norms and leadership structure. That's going to take a lot of relationship building. Okay, for a community to really respect the coalition needs to be community members. Okay, so you need to find that person in the community who's going to support everything that you're doing as a coalition and be willing to say that they're on the coalition, that they are involved and they're willing to help, and that'll bring on some of those other people that are really strong voices to help you get the respect of the community. Okay, but it's going to take a lot of building that relationship. Some people are just never going to agree with you. Okay, I've had that happen too. I've had somebody walk out of a meeting and say, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and I said, okay, bye. I didn't need her, okay? But she ended up coming back, and they do, because then they see the success of the coalition and they want to be involved. Okay. So next I was just going to talk about a couple of different examples, and we'll keep filtering questions. Jamie, thank you for filtering some of these questions for me. So I can tell you that, and we already talked a little bit about this, it can be extremely uncomfortable if you're a provider and you are having to be a coalition director or run a coalition and be that provider role. So I would highly, highly advocate that you have somebody on the coalition that is from your provider agency that can be that provider agency role and not have one person do both, because it can be very confusing and very hard to do. Okay. I've also seen providers ask way too much of coalitions. You don't need to do that. Again, I don't want just a butt in a chair. I need somebody who's going to help us as a coalition. So, you know, come to the table and be ready to work and do some things. Okay. Okay, we're getting more questions. Let's see. Have you seen positive personality characteristics that we need to bring to the table during conflict or trust building? You need to be open-minded, and you really need to listen. I think it was Stephen Covey who said, you know, you seek first to listen and second to understand. I'm paraphrasing. But you really need to come and be open-minded to hear what they have to say. You might encounter some really angry people, and you just need to acknowledge that they're angry and they just want to be heard. Okay, so just be open-minded and positive and just be yourself. Don't be defensive, and just let them get out whatever they need to say, and then come at it from your position of willing to help, willing to be there. You know, if they're complaining about another person or somebody before you or your agency, just tell them, you know, I don't know what happened. I'm willing to look into it. You know, try to filter around that, but you're not that person. Okay, and if you're not running the agency, you have nothing to apologize for. But be willing to get them to the right person to help solve whatever issue is happening. Okay, so for instance, the school sector reviews prevention activities at the administration level, but the member continues to contact individual schools or individual school staff. Whoa. That's not good. So you're saying that you have a coalition, and a coalition has set prevention activities that have already been reviewed by the schools, but this person that is on the coalition continues to contact individual schools or individual school staff to achieve their agenda, basically. That needs to be a conversation, and it might need to be a conversation between the coalition leader, this person, and somebody at the school or schools, or maybe it's the director of student services or the superintendent, and just have a conversation that, you know, they can't continue to do that. I don't even know why they would do that. I would love to know more so I could try to help. It seems like they have their own agenda that they want to accomplish, and it seems like eventually they're going to give the coalition a bad name, and that's where I would come at this from, is that these are activities that have already been approved. We're working on them. Why are you not wanting to work with us? I mean, it seems like they're working against you. So, yeah, I would love to hear more about that. Yeah, perception of the issue versus what the data shows. There's always going to be a perception versus what the data shows, and the data isn't always the best representation, right? That's why we have both qualitative and quantitative. So we have data that's the numbers, and then we have, you know, our data that's focus groups and key informant interviews, you know. So I would definitely take a look at both, but ultimately you're going to have the numbers to prove it. Unfortunately, you know, when we do our student surveys, it's all self-report. So not every youth is going to be 100% accurate and tell you the truth if they used in the past 30 days. Some will, but this is where, you know, I would really make sure you're doing focus groups and talking to the youth and talking to parents and what are they seeing, and talking to law enforcement, because sometimes, and they'll tell you this, they'll bust a party, but they didn't charge anybody for underage drinking. You know, so these are different types of ways that you can look at different data and make the best decision for the community that you're serving. Okay, in the communities, coalitions have started and stopped so many times over a long period of time. Coalition members change over time or completely disappear. Sometimes it is hard for communities to support coalitions because so many times they're viewed as been there, done that before. Will your coalition efforts stay around? This is interesting. So I would say I haven't had that experience, but I'm not surprised because, like we talked about earlier, there are coalitions for everything, right? It seems like coalition is one of the buzzwords, and everybody sits on at least 5, and there's so many different meetings to attend. So, you know, it's one of those things you're going to have to set yourself apart, okay? What makes you different? And really, it's going to take that networking, that relationship building. You're going to have to be at every single thing, every single event in that community that's important. That's where the people are. You know, I always tell the story of I had to start going to church to recruit a pastor who was doing really great work but would not meet with me. So I had to start going to church, you know, on Sundays to try to recruit him, and eventually did. But it takes a lot of work. Coalition work is not easy. So it's one of those things you're going to have to spend the time and take the time and make the extra effort to be in that community to prove to them you're not going anywhere, okay, and that the coalition you're a part of is doing great work and you want them to be involved. Now, on the other hand, if the coalition is doing great things, let's say the drug take-back coming up, invite them to it. Take pictures of it, promote it everywhere, put it on Facebook and Instagram and Foursquare, put it on the website, you know, make a big deal about it and promote your successes, because the more you celebrate and promote your successes, the more people are going to want to be involved. If you're not doing that, if you're not really active about what you're doing and showing your success, Nobody's going to know about it. Does anybody just randomly call you up and say, I want to know what the coalition's doing? People don't have time for that, okay? So you've really got to be public about it and show off what's happening, okay? And you have to do that for your coalition as well. I always say buy the cookie cake. You know, it's not the healthiest thing, but we celebrate everything. We got another year drug-free community grant. We got a $5,000 whatever grant, or, you know, we completed the school survey. You know, that's a beast. There's so many things. So I would just celebrate and make your presence known, and you don't have to be in your face about it, but, you know, take pictures, send them out, do all those things. What is the best way to engage community leaders as representing coalitions about policy change that can be a difficult conversation in small communities with political environments? Ooh, that is a mouthful. What is the best way to engage community leaders as representing coalitions about policy change that can be a difficult conversation in small communities? So this is where we go back to the 7 steps from CADCA. As we talked about, you have to start, you know, providing information, building support. If you start with those key things and follow those steps, they could take a year, but they are really going to help you to help make that policy change. Now, when it comes to being political, especially in a small community, and I came from a small community growing up, you can have your personal opinion. I would not put it out there, okay? You know, when I go to Capitol Hill, when I'm talking to legislators, they're never going to know my stance on different things because I'm representing my agency and that coalition. So you have to be able to play both sides, okay? And I'm not saying go in there and say, oh, I totally agree with that bill you passed. No, okay? One of my representatives is good friends with the other representative who was shot during the baseball game in D.C. like a year or two ago. And when I met with him, you know, I might not care for whatever their politics are. I asked how his friend was doing, and he was really appreciative. So you have to be able to build that relationship, okay, bring them information, you know, share with them what you're doing, follow up with staffers, follow up with local staff and DC staff, you know, send them the thank you notes for meeting with you. You have to do all those little political things on your end as well, okay? And we can talk more about that offline too. Okay, let's see. Okay, so you've had a meeting with the member, the superintendent, school sector designee, the health and wellness coordinator, coalition chair, and vice chair, yet the issues have continued. So unfortunately, this is one of the conversations I would have with whoever is running the coalition, and if that's you, then I'm sorry this is happening to you. I would say it's time for them to move on, and they no longer need to be associated with the coalition, and you're basically going to have to ask them to remove themselves because they are no longer working in a positive way with the coalition. I've had a similar conversation before where I had a person who is one of those loud people who overtalks all of my really quiet, shy people. And in a small coalition setting, you want to make sure that you hear from everybody, and that was not happening. So I was able to approach them and say, you know, I really value your opinion, and you have so many great ideas, but I really need to make sure as the coalition coordinator that I'm hearing from everybody. So, you know, if you don't mind, like, let me just go around the room and hear from everybody so I can, you know, make sure that's in the minutes. Again, different type of situation, but it sounds like this person, if they're not respecting you and they're not willing to work on this, then it's time for them to move on. And it's time for the schools to understand that they're no longer affiliated with the coalition. So I'm sorry that's happening. That's really not good at all. The coalition coordinator, staff, or provider organization always have a fixed set of agenda and directives, not necessarily looking for what majority of the members would like to work on, how to handle these. So, so it's the coalition that's the problem in this one. The coalition is always staff, a provider organization. Oh, okay. They already know what they want to work on, and they're not looking for what the majority, then it's not a coalition. Okay, a coalition is about the community. You know, as somebody who's been working with coalitions for a long time, I'll tell them all the time, you know, I can give you Lindsay's opinion, but it's not about Lindsay. This isn't the Lindsay show. It's about the collective. So people need to vote on things. Even if I don't get a vote as a paid staff, and I make sure everybody knows that way up front. I can just give my opinion. But ultimately, it needs to be focused on the data and what the data is saying. And if they already have a fixed agenda and it's not what the coalition wants to work on, again, based on funding, if it's something that the funding stipulates they have to do, is the funding telling the coordinator what they have to do? But it sounds like it's a little different in this situation. I think there needs to be a conversation here. There might be somebody else trying to tell the coalition coordinator what they need to focus on. But again, the coordinator really, their job is to coordinate, is to bring people together, have them in a room, and make sure they're following their funding guidelines and that they're following, what the community wants them to work on and handle. So this is, I would maybe have a one-on-one with this person and ask them, I noticed at the last meeting we were talking about marijuana, but all you kept talking about is underage drinking. So, is there something in our funding that says we have to do, underage drinking? Because, I really wanted to focus on marijuana and see what they say. I find a lot of times people don't know what's in the guidelines for funding, so something I would ask to start if you haven't already and see how to go from there. But if they're not taking into consideration what the coalition wants to focus on and they're allowed to do so based on funding guidelines, then it's not really a coalition. A coalition has to be run by the community. Okay. Yeah, somebody said, yeah, share the positive stories and examples. Sometimes we don't share the progress we have made enough. Absolutely. Especially when you're coming into this field and you're new, it can be very overwhelming and people get overwhelmed easily. But, I always tell people it's an uphill battle, but you have to celebrate. When you see your coalition and they're like, how are you doing? And you're like, oh, it's been a long week, and it's like Tuesday. They're like, what does that mean? Because they don't understand. They don't see you every day. They don't know what you're going through. Back in the day when we had to submit paper grants for drug-free communities, I took a picture of me mailing it because it weighed 7 pounds, and it was really tall and a lot of paper, and I showed the coalition, like, this is what I've been working on, and this is why I haven't slept in like 3 weeks. So, it's funny now. It wasn't at the time, but, share those stories and tell them the grants you're working on and share the deliverables and the different things that you have to do so that way they know. Otherwise, they don't know, and they assume as paid staff that you're good to do everything because they don't know what you're struggling with and they don't know what the outcomes are. I tell the coalition everything. Hey, we got in the Lock Your Meds campaign stuff. Here's materials. Let's give them out. We got this many lock boxes. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to give them? What's our plan? You want their input on all those different things. Okay, share those. And buy the cookie cake or buy the coffee. Put something fun on it. When school's over, it'll be, yay, summer vacation, and, who's going on a great vacation? One of the things I love that we do is we ask some random question when we do introductions every time. Like last time it was, if you had a boat, what would you name it? And we got some really great boat names. Before that, it was, what's your favorite all-time, Super Bowl commercial? You just get to know your coalition members a little bit more, and even your providers. Same thing. Make it fun. It does not have to be another boring meeting with a blank, a black and white paper agenda where you just sit there and give updates. If that's all you're doing, you're not being productive and having good meetings. Okay. What else? I think we've covered everything in there. There's a lot in the chat box, so if there's something I have not covered, please resend it. I'll give you a minute to type. Is there any other questions about anything that we've covered? There you go. There's the monkey. Questions, comments, concerns, or complaints. I'll take complaints too. Is there anything that was not covered that you were hoping would be covered? Okay. I'll give it just another few seconds. Because if there's not, then we're going to end early, which I know you're also disappointed since, my stomach's growling too, getting close to lunch.
Lindsay, as people consider final questions and thoughts, we will email out a survey for today via a message, of course. That link will also include a access to the webinar for viewing at a later date.
Okay.
And the slides that were used today too. So that will be distributed this afternoon probably, and most certainly. And please complete the evaluation survey. Sometimes we don't have a really good response rate when it's not attached to WebEx as an immediate completion item. But just click on the link via the email, and it'll take you about 60 seconds to complete. And that helps us with the design of future webinars and allocation of funding and so forth. So again, Lindsay, I'll give it back to you, and we can finish things up.
Wonderful, thanks, Jamie. So I'm not seeing any more questions or comments, so that's great. I hope that I was able to help and provide some good insight. I just sent out my email address and my cell phone number, so please reach out to me if you have questions or specific situations like the person going to the school around the coalition. Please feel free to call me. I'm happy to chat with you and brainstorm some ideas. Even if I don't have a solution, I'm happy to, put you in touch with somebody else in a different coalition, a different part of the state who might be able to help you better than I can. So, yeah, I think we're going to end a little early today, so you're welcome. I hope to hear from some of you, and if not, then please take care and have a great day. Jamie, anything else? Nope. Okay.
Good to go. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.